So, and I'll give you a theory that explains that, but that means that anything during lunch or a break that drives down their self-concept is going to make them harder to deal with. Now, if you've had a kid come out of 3 classes where they've been treated badly by someone not in their adult, of course they're going to be more difficult by definition. And that's a problem. And it's not an easy one to fix, especially in a classroom, because you'd have to rebuild their self-concept somehow to overcome the damage that's just been done in the last 2 hours. It's almost impossible because you're trying to teach a subject, right? So this is one of the things that if we could get it across the school, it would be so much better if teachers could just stay in their adults, no matter who they were. And that's something I'm going to expect you. I mean, that's part of the reason I joined the project, to figure out. I've been working with St Paul's in Altona for 11 years, 12 years, and it's still a struggle with some teachers to get them to do what they know is going to work. They know it's going to work because they've tried it. By the way, that makes it worse. I said to you, the post-guru syndrome's worse. They tried it, it worked, and they're no longer able to do it because the kids control them before they get a chance to, almost. And they feel really bad, which means their self-concept gets driven down, which means they become more problematic. So the whole thing is really, really challenging. But having said that, if 10% or 20% of teachers can't do this, too bad. At least 80% might, or even 50% or 60%. So I don't think, because I know that these kids, they will learn from the best examples they've provided. So they'll learn something from being with even one teacher, and they'll remember that teacher too. They'll tell you about it, that teacher treated them. And we did some study on what are the best teachers, what are your worst teachers, and the key factor was treats children like adults. I hadn't even thought of it until we were having this discussion. It was way back in the 80s. One of the key things, and it's in the literature all the way through, treats kids as people. That was the item. They gave us it in a verbal. Okay, someone at the back has been waiting very patiently.
I just wanted to dispel a myth about primary schools in that our school, for instance, we have 90 staff, 60 of them teachers, and the average class at our school would interact with 5 to 6 adults all day, every day. A significant one, admittedly, but like taking a subject or a class with specialists, it's that variability and confusion it causes, because in any organisation, and if you apply our staff, for instance, we have the prisoners, the saboteurs, the volunteers. I mean, you can name the shirts like you would in your class. Yep. So the acceptability of this is building that trust. So it is a myth in today's context to say that in primary schools it's significantly different and people would come forward, because in bigger organisations they don't.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that variability. And it's why it's important for us all to be on the same page.
You could probably multiply that a little bit, because where the troubles occur most in primary is with, in fact, those specialists, because they don't have that strength of relationship necessarily. Because when I was visiting, I noticed that we were looking for ways of transferring some of that relationship from the classroom teacher to the specialist, by having even the classroom teacher come into the specialist or the specialist into the classroom teacher when they had them, because there was a lot of this going and coming and so on. But when they came back, they were already sort of unsettled, because sometimes the specialists don't have the ability to manage them in an adult way, because they're provocative more so with the specialists than they are with a classroom teacher as well.
Well, perhaps one of the issues then is and we're grappling with that, is reducing the number of kids that a person that's a non-classroom teacher actually interacts with across a week, so that relationship can be built. I mean, that's putting the kids first. I mean, it's very challenging to the clan mentality of faculties and specialists, but it increases the relationship powerfully by knowing who the child is and how they react.
Yeah, I think also, even if you have that many, there are ways of strengthening that bond between the specialist and that classroom teacher, so that that relationship flows a little over, by having that classroom teacher show interest in what goes on in that specialist class, and like someone said here, preparing them for that activity, debriefing them after them to see who was responsible, especially communally so. You know, if you got a report from every specialist as to which kids were communally responsible, those A's and B's would be under a fair bit of pressure to make sure people did the right thing. So there must be ways and ways of increasing that relationship, and I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But this is your business. This is your business. It's really not my business. My business is to highlight relationship power, to highlight rights and responsibilities, and hope that someone in this room is going to come up with a really clever way to see that people who have limited time with these kids somehow inherit the relationship of the person who has most time. You know, if you went and you look back in original sources that are 2,000 years old, it says that if the father is away from home, often he is not allowed to be the disciplinarian. It has to be the mother. Right? Because and the implication there is that she is the one with the ongoing working relationship. So she can afford to be the disciplinarian. Someone who hasn't got that level of relationship takes a risk. So if the father, and most places don't pick this up, I mean, it's really sad that, you know, the father, wait till your father gets home. Well, that's exactly the last thing that you should be doing technically, because the father has a lot to risk. If he's the heavy in the system, because he's hardly there, if that's the normal system. If it's the woman who's hardly there, then she has a lot to risk. So it's really interesting. Schools are going to have to struggle with this somehow, and I bet you there are a lot of clever solutions. We just haven't thought of all of them yet, and the more we try, the better it'll be. Sorry, you were going to say something? Yeah.
One of the big issues, I think, if we go back to thinking about that you have a damaged student that's been yelled at or whatever over, you know, 6 sessions or however many sessions before they arrive at your doors. And if you're the person that does have a good relationship with that student, how do you then go about preparing them for your class so that they're back on board? So you've got to do some amount of damage control without them professionally undermining your colleague, because sometimes it's really difficult to find the right language that lets that student know, one, that it wasn't okay to be screamed at like that, because it's not, and we all know that, but without actually undermining your colleague. It's really, really hard, and it's a rock and a hard place a lot of the time, and especially with middle school students, so 7 to 9, where it is about that relationship, and it is about them feeling safe and liked, and yeah, and I think that's the big struggle, I think, for me personally, is how do I do that in a way that speaks to the child, but at the same time doesn't put me in an awkward situation.
Yeah, you don't want to be unprofessional. Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm not sure about the answer to that question either. It's an interesting question, and I've come across that in all the schools I've ever worked with in consultancy. One way is to, as I say, have the staff identify what is responsible behaviour by teachers. If these rights are on your wall, it's not hard to get a staff. I can show you, 90% of staff will agree that if a teacher is yelling in anger or sending kids out, all this sort of stuff, it's not that they're bad people, it's that they are acting in a way that they need support. They don't need condemnation. It's not going to help. You know, you're no good condemning them. That's just going to make it worse. It's like the kid. So you've got to somehow provide them support. So the question I'll address to you is, what is that support going to look like? Right? How does it get to them? These are really big questions in schools. These are the hardest ones. I think that's where we're at, actually. And if you read the literature this year on professional development, this is where it's at, you know. And it wouldn't matter whether it's literacy or this or anything. The question will be, once you know, how do you first of all set up unambiguous criteria that will allow you to say, you look as though you could do some help. Is there anything I can do? For example, I've even had, at one of my previous lives, I wrote down a list of things teachers say to be helpful. You would be shocked. You know, oh geez, there've never been any trouble for me. You know, well, that's not really helpful. And yet a lot of people in the staff would say, when in the schools I was at, that's all right, especially men. Men sort of were more objective, and it was a fact. They're not a problem for me. They're not thinking necessarily